we had some technical difficulties and we had to change computers. There was no sound, so I'm going to wait for someone to join us so they can tell us whether or not they hear us. Hi, I'm Karen Boite from the Ontario Autism Coalition, and I'm here at ETFO with Sam Hammond and Lark Barker, and I apologize for the delay. We're just going to wait and see if somebody joins us.
Please.
Hopefully somebody will. Hey, you got a joke?
No.
No jokes?
No, they don't allow me to tell jokes.
Oh, they don't like, okay. So what's the difference between a Canadian lobster fisherman and an American one? No.
Gosh.
What, sorry, wait, I just blew the joke. I blew the joke. What's the difference between Canadian lobsters and American lobsters?
I don't know.
You don't know?
A border?
The difference between Canadian lobsters and oh, I blew the joke again. I can't tell a joke. I blew it.
They're Canadian.
Can you hear us?
Yay!
Oh, you can hear us. Okay, I'll tell the joke because whoever started watching this is going to want me to get this joke right. What's the difference between Canadian lobster fishermen? No! Never mind. I can't tell a joke. Hi, gang. We were killing some time just to make sure that people in the community could hear us. We had to change computers. Mine wasn't working properly, and people couldn't hear us. My name is Karen, and I am from the Ontario Autism Coalition. Hello! And this is?
Sam Hammond from ETFO.
And this is?
Lark Barker.
We do Facebook Lives from time to time where we reach out to people in the community, important people like this guy, to talk about the issues that concern our kids and our community. And today we are here at ETFO talking to Sam Hammond and Lark Barker. So Sam, without further ado, who the heck are you, Sam?
First of all, I'm here with two experts, two very important people in the community, more important than I am, and I'm pleased to be here with them and to be on FaceTime Live with you.
He says that to all the autism moms.
No,
Yep.
but I'm the current president of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario.
So what do you do as the president? What is that?
I meet with important people, and I'm the president of an education union here in Ontario. We have 83,000 members, teachers, occasional teachers, designated early childhood educators, educational support personnel, and professional support personnel. We have a small group of educational assistants who are part of our union. And what I do on a daily basis, based on our Constitution and bylaws, we're a very democratic organization. I represent our members at Queen's Park with school boards across the province in conjunction with our local leaders in every school board, and do the best I can to advocate on behalf of our members and for publicly funded education in Ontario.
So Lark, who are you?
My name is Lark Barker. I am the proud mom of 2 boys with ASD. I am also a special education specialist and have taught in Section 23 programs and some other special education programs in a local school board.
Lovely. Well, thank you both for being here. We really appreciate your time. I ask people to send me questions in advance of our Facebook Lives to save time, but please feel free to post live. Please feel free to ask any question you like, and we'll likely get to them at the end of the chat. We plan to go for about an hour, but we're 17 minutes late because we were having technical difficulties. So we'll keep Sam as long as we possibly can. So Sam, what's a union?
A union is the legally binding organization that represents workers or professionals here in Ontario or across Canada or across the globe. And in our case, we represent our 83,000 members. Our primary role, I guess, at the foundation is under legislation and the Education Act, Labor Relations Act. We bargain on behalf of our members. We try to enhance their rights, their working conditions, and at the same time, because those working conditions affect student learning conditions, we're advocating on behalf of students in publicly funded education as well. But we also, as a union, provide a great deal of workshops, professional development for our members. And all of the work that we do is not just confined to schools and our members. We spend a lot of time trying to go beyond schools and our classrooms into communities around areas like social justice, human rights, etc. Whether we're working to eliminate poverty or enhance human rights for LGBTQ communities, etc. It's a very broad spectrum in terms of what we try to do as a union with our members across the province.
So you're not busy?
Some days,
Some
not
days,
right, yeah.
not right now.
Yeah.
So I guess you were a teacher before you got the big job?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What kind of teacher were you, and how long did you do that?
I started teaching in 1986. I was an occasional teacher for about 18 months, and then I got a job as a health and physical education specialist. I taught kindergarten through grade 8 health and phys ed up until 1998 when I started to move into a more into a role as a union leader at the local and subsequently here at the provincial office.
Did you ever have the opportunity to work with autistic children?
I did. Sorry. I did, but in terms of a phys ed teacher, and at the time I taught, I think there's two parts of it.
Yeah.
There was one autistic child I knew that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with because I had conversations with his parents. But other than that, at the time, there was no documentation. There was no specific spec ed programs related to them. And the other part is I may have been working with children with autism and not knowing it.
Yeah.
Because of where they may have been on the spectrum. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a very limited background in terms of working with children with autism, but I remember that student vividly.
Yeah. So Lark, you were and are a special education teacher. What kinds of classroom settings have you worked in?
So I worked in Section 23 classrooms for about 8 years across panels, and have done some other
What's
programs.
a Section 23 class?
A Section 23 program is, so it is funded differently than from the regular public school system, and those classrooms are for children who are in care, custody, or treatment. So there are Section 23 classrooms at Sick Kids Hospital,
Right.
if you're having surgery. There are classrooms that are aligned with youth justice. So, for lack of a better term, if they're incarcerated youth, they have a right to education. And then there are classrooms for mental health treatment.
Right.
I do know in the TDSB, there's Aptus, that used to be Mookie Baum, that I believe, don't quote me because I did not work there,
Yeah.
deals specifically with ASD.
Right.
So each program run might have a special focus
Right.
depending on the needs
So
of the
Sam,
students.
are there programs in schools that are not funded by the Ministry of Education?
Not necessarily in schools. So if it's in a publicly funded public education school board, school within that, that's all funded by the ministry. I'm not sure about the funding for Section 23 schools.
Okay.
I should know, but I don't. But funding in general is a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of what isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not your area of expertise?
Well, it is my area.
Okay.
Well, I was gonna say,
I'll leave everything else to you two and
Yeah.
do my best.
Yeah.
I don't, we can always check if someone has a question. I think when you're coming into a Section 23 program, you cease to be a student of a board. So you are actually in treatment, or you are part of the agency that's running the program. It's almost like the teacher's on a secondment to that program.
I see.
We have to, a long time ago, teachers were grandfathered in. It's a little bit different between secondary schools and elementary, but
Right.
for at least, I'm gonna say the past 15 years, anybody that goes into section is on a 3-year contract. You have to keep applying to
I
have
see.
your job.
I see. So you're a mom,
Mhm.
and
I think so.
you're a mom. You're a mom of children on the spectrum and
Yes.
a teacher.
Yes.
And I think, like Laura Kirby McIntosh, you can see both ends of the table,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What's it like to know a lot and still have to advocate?
Well, I think I think it can be frustrating. I'm trying to think of how I would be diplomatic in this. One thing that's hard is that when I go in to advocate for my children, I am a professional in that quadrant of schools. So I am a professional first, according to our union regulations. And so when I'm talking with staff, I always have to remember that I have my teacher's hat on as well.
Yeah.
It's frustrating when you know what your child needs and you just can't access it. I sometimes feel like your child has to be in crisis before things will really be done. You know, one thing with the OAP for me is that, you know, I have focused my advocacy on other areas because I always thought autism was handled. We had the OAP, my kids were diagnosed, they got on wait lists. I was waiting because I knew they were going to get this support. And now years have gone by and now there's new worries. So it's hard. For example, I have a child in grade 10 who does well academically, has eaten lunch by himself for 5 years, does not speak in class. It's very socially overwhelming for him. And to get the exceptionalities in the school board, we had to let him also fail academically. So before he could go to IPRC, he did obviously have a diagnosis of autism. And then he had a psychoed where he was given another diagnosis.
Let's get back to that. Let's get
Okay.
back to these issues.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's quite all right.
Yeah.
That's quite all right. You know, I'm a terrible interrupter.
No.
Is that a
No,
word? I'm a
you're
terrible interrupter. But I do want to get
Yeah.
I do want to get into that area. Before we do, so we've had a little bit of a reprieve in the community. We received a big shock a few months ago that 8,000 to 9,000 children who are in full-time therapy programs funded by the Ontario Autism Program are being jettisoned,
Yeah,
right? They're being tossed out. But we got a little 6-month reprieve. However, in September, there are going to be 8,000 or 9,000 children who are possibly very severely affected by their autism entering the school system. What's the talk around the water cooler about that?
It is extremely problematic, and it is concerning. I can't tell you how extremely concerned teachers, support staff are, we are as a union, in terms of the position that's going to put those some 8,000 students who will be back in the system full-time without the much needed and proper supports for those students on a daily basis and specific needs-based supports for those students. Yes, there's yes, there's a 6-month period here. It didn't happen April the 1st, but it is still going to happen September the 1st. And there is, let me, if I can, just let me go back a bit.
Yeah, please, please.
So before this situation, if you go back 20 years, Mike Harris and the Conservatives took $2 billion out of education and created the funding formula that we now use, that a part of is specific to special education. So 20 years later, never replacing that $2 billion in today's dollars, the system is already struggling to meet the basic needs that exist now, particularly for students with special education children with autism. That's going to be compounded 10 times based on the lack of funding that has gone into the system and the lack of supports for those students coming back in September. And quite frankly, without the funding, it's shameful in terms of the position that this government has put parents and those children with autism in come September.
We're also, in addition to that generation of children, the program has been changed to a flat rate funding system, and children who have very, very high needs, who require full-time support, likely will not have them unless the family is fortunate enough to be able to provide that privately. So it's not a needs-based. It's not needs-based funding, that's for sure. Children won't be assessed, but so we will also have, in addition to those 8,000 or 9,000 other children who pulled out of the program, is all of the kids newly diagnosed, turning 4 and going to kindergarten. Do you have a sense? Nobody really has a sense of how many children this will be. What kind of discussions are teachers having? Are people approaching you, or spec ed teachers worried about this? And also, sorry, I keep going, but other teachers who don't work with children with autism, are they aware of what's coming to their school?
I in general, all of our members, not just special education teachers or educational assistants, are concerned about and talking about the problems that influx of students in terms of their needs and others are going to have on the system, because those members, our members on the ground now, whether it's our members or OSSTF or GP or Electa or our Francophone colleagues, they live the realities of that every single day, and they know the position it's going to put families in and those students come September without the much needed needs-based supports. And you're right to say that the funding model now is a statistical model and not specific to a child. So now you have educational assistants, for example, who are not assigned to a specific child, but they might be assigned to a school. And within the course of that day, or if a new student comes in, they can, in the course of a day, be going between 3 to 4 or 5 different students trying to meet those needs. And that's not helping that student at all.
Yeah, we had a very good discussion with Fred Hahn and QP members, where we talked about this extensively, and it's on our YouTube page for people who might be interested, about the responsibilities of EAs and the vagaries of their jobs sometimes. Did you have a question you wanted to ask, Lark?
No.
Okay, so let's go on. She's just nodding.
Yeah.
She just looked.
As long as she's nodding, I know I'm okay.
You're okay. You're okay.
Yeah.
You are okay. We're very happy and honored that you took the time to talk to us.
Likewise.
So let's go to our questions from parents. Myra asks, why aren't third-party providers allowed in classrooms? Why? Many families have ABA therapists working with their children who are unable to come, observe, troubleshoot, and provide training. So what's the deal with that?
Yeah.
Is it because of you? Did you say no?
No, we didn't say no. And let me give you a bit of background on this. I was saying to my 2 friends here,
Karen and Lark.
Yes, sorry.
I'm Lark, she's Karen.
Yeah. This is Karen. This is Lark. When we presented our pre-budget brief, and we had a section in there about autism funding and negative effects that was going to have. That was a part of a broader one. But the only question that we got from a PC candidate, MPP, was specific to this.
Do you want to name that?
I'm not. No.
I'm a bit of a devil.
No, I know. Yeah, that's why I say no.
Okay.
But anyway, it was specific to Sam Hammond. Why are you not allowing ABA therapists in schools? That's not true. So here's what should happen. And let's look at this from a broader perspective. Rather, first of all, ABA therapists should be regulated. That's the first thing. So if ABA therapists who are unregulated come into the school system, they're not accountable or can't be held accountable within that school system or under regulation. So that's, for us, that's the very first key piece that I think has to happen. What we have said is, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had an education system that was properly funded, that included ABA therapists as a part of that system within the school board, as employees of the school board. An integrated system that had those ABA therapists regulated, a part of the school board system within that. And I think there are areas in the United States or states in the US, in New York and New Jersey, where that kind of a model is working really well in terms of supporting children with autism, making sure that the supports that need to be there are there. And wouldn't it be wonderful now, all of the therapists who are being laid off, if this government put forward the money to actually hire them into the system, so that they can be there and work with children with autism on a regular basis. So it's not just, I appreciate the question, but I think it's a much bigger answer. And there's also a part to it too. If those ABA therapists are not regulated, and they do an amazing job, don't get me wrong, but the other part of that is we want to keep publicly funded education public. So we don't want to start to move sections of private businesses, et cetera, into publicly funded education. How about we create a publicly funded education system that's properly funded, that includes that within that envelope?
It's very confusing for parents, right? I mean, now we know the system's changing, but previously, if your child was going to a program that was funded by the OAP, the Ontario Autism Program, that's public money. Schools are funded by public money. So what's the big deal, right? From the parents, from the parents' point of view, right? And when you have a kid who has high needs, and we're talking about some children that we can't get from the front door to the classroom without their therapist, and the parents going, well, what do I do? What do I do? Keep them home forever? For how long? When is this going to change? You know, it's the stress in our community is very high.
And we need to work together to ensure that student that you talked about that can't get from the front door of their classroom and all the others, that they absolutely have the supports that they need on a regular basis, and not for a half hour here or just at the front door. But it's a bigger conversation, and it's a conversation that the current government and all governments need to be a part of to solve. And key to it is, so let's not forget, key to it is funding into the system to make that happen.
Peter asks, and feel free to jump in anytime.
I was just going to jump in quickly about that, in the sense that I think what I hear sometimes on the street, it's very easy, people, the government with their sound bites, always like, it's the unions, it's the unions. And I often say, I'm employed by the school board. They dictate my job, they dictate what assessments I can use, what is going on a legally binding document like a report card or IEP. So I think, the unions don't have all the power that they're blocking.
So your boss is the school board, not this guy.
Yes.
So you don't have to be respectful to Sam. I'm not, clearly. Peter asks.
I was going to say, I would love to see ABAs in the school. The school boards have psychologists in the school that give psychoeds and do the recommendations and follow up. When we're bringing in the children with autism, we need those services in the school as well. Children spend 6 hours a day at school. That is where they're meeting with their peers. This is the best spot to work on some of the sensory and social integration.
It's the best hours of their day.
It's the best hours of their day.
When they're fresh and ready and alive. Peter asks, what is ETFO's perspective on staff receiving training to become more knowledgeable and sensitive to students with ASD?
We think, so in terms of what the government is saying, here's funding for our members to take those additional courses to become more aware of, more informed of children with autism in the spectrum. Absolutely, if our members want to take them, we would encourage them to take that because that benefits everyone, both the teachers, our members, and their interaction with students and how they can best help those students. So we have no objections to that, but what we also need to keep in mind is that teachers are not therapists, right? So there are trained professional ABA therapists who that's what they do, but providing a broader understanding for our members of all of the concerns that we're talking about at their core and what families have to deal with and what those children are actually having to deal with on a daily basis, absolutely.
Can I ask a question around that? So as a teacher, if the government's saying, okay, we're going to give you online modules, so does that then make me an expert, like, oh great, my school board's trained me, now I can take however many children with autism and special needs and other exceptionalities because now that's sort of what concerns me as a teacher. Am I then an expert and I'm now all responsible for all of these different, using differentiated instruction? Now I'm, accountable to these 20 million different things.
That is a challenge with the OAC that we have, right? Is that when you have your child in therapy, you're aware of the expertise of the people who are working with your kids, right? And the setting, right? So you've got your ITs, your instructor therapists, you've got your senior therapists, you've got your BCABA, you've got your BCBA, you've got your psychologist. It's all autism all the time. It's wonderful and fun, and the kids are learning and thriving, and it's a completely different environment. I can recall there was Kathleen Wynn's government, the discussion of training EAs, which no one's against, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, we'll just give them a pamphlet, or we'll just give them an envelope.
Right. Yeah.
But these people spend years of on-the-ground training, being supervised in a culture of support amongst each other. It's not a lone teacher with many children. It's a very different environment.
In a very specialized field.
Very specialized. Yeah.
And if I can answer Lark's question, no to the online module. That does nothing for anyone, and absolutely not. You're not even close to being a specialist. And what I see happening is that shift from all of those specialized, that kind of environment to, well, we'll provide an online module or a course for members, but to move away from all of the costing that's associated with that. Well, they've taken that course, they should be able to deal with it.
We found that we have, in truth, it's hard to explain your child, for many of us, to our own families, much less a school principal, much less the MPP, who would rather do anything than sit down with you for an hour, and you're going to give them a crash course in what your kids needs, what's not available, and all the walls that constantly go up in your life. And this is what families are up against, right? Ravi asks, can the union indicate what they tell teachers around restraints? Whose job is that? EAs, teachers, principals?
It's an interesting question.
You're asking Lark.
I'm going to let Sam go first, and then maybe I'll chime in with my own experience.
So we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, Sam.
Yeah.
And
is this the ugly? Are we
ugly? It's complicated.
No, it is
right.
complicated.
There will be some parents bristling, right?
Yeah.
When somebody has to be restrained, that means they've gone past the point of no return. And my mommy brain goes, well, how did he get there?
Yeah.
Why is it that the kid is so distressed, so distraught, that this is the last resort before they hurt themselves or hurt someone else?
Yeah.
So this question just kind of hits you between the eyes. I realize that.
No,
but that's our life.
Yeah.
That's our life.
especially when you're talking about runners, right?
Well,
I-
yeah,
I-
I mean, could it be stopping, you know, like, often these questions, you don't get the full picture,
Yeah.
right?
So,
But what are the rules? What's the training around?
yeah, and I didn't mean just
I know.
for those
Yeah,
children.
You
who run.
worry too much,
Yeah,
Sam.
no, I'm not
He's
worried.
so nice.
It's a very,
It's a loaded question.
well, it's a good question.
It's a good question.
And it's an important question. So let my first response to this be that in terms of restraint, I think that what we say to our members only as a last resort, right? And we all know that restraint, even with training, it unfolds differently across the province depending on who.
You know what pops into my
Who's
head
involved?
too, Sam? It's a little off course, but my kid's been in service at his center for 3 years. I've never seen a child restrained.
Yeah, and yes.
You know, I've never seen these contented, busy, happy children who are learning. I've never seen one of them require restraint.
Yeah, so we what we say to our members is the only time, it's a bit of a long answer, but the only time you should be in an appropriate way restraining or touching a child is if they're hurting themselves or you fear for their safety or the safety of someone else. And that restraint should only be used as a last resort, and it should just be used to immediately solve that situation. I think what happens, so the behavioral management courses that they're offering in boards, we've had to step in and say, no, take out this whole physical part, the information behind it and the lead up to it, that's very important. What's more important than restraint is for our members to know that there may be children on the spectrum who and one child that I dealt with, for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, for whatever reason, sensory overload, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Just make sure they're safe. You don't have to go near them. Just let them get through that. Then they get back and they're okay. As opposed to I need to restrain him now and that sort of thing. So I think education is a huge part of it. Having those specialists within the education system is important. But in terms of restraint, only as an absolute last resource, you need to know for the safety of children and not in the excessive way that we have seen. Absolutely not.
So Lisa asks, what's being done to address the exclusion clause? Kids as young as 7 are being kicked out of public education.
Yeah, so no child should be kicked out of publicly funded education. And I have to say it again, go back to funding and go back to the much needed supports that are needed, right? We are completely against a child being removed from the system for extended periods of time. There are cases, because of the lack of supports on the ground, where a principal, this is not the union telling them, but a principal or the administrators in the school will make a decision that child should, parents should pick up that child for a short period of time. But we do not agree with, don't support extended period.
Are principals part of the union?
No,
Okay.
they're not. They have a principals council, but they're not a part of our union. But I will say this, it's a complicated, because of the lack of support. I think what happens in schools, to be honest, is in some cases, they get to a point where they've tried everything, if you will. It may not be the case every time. And then as a last resort, they're saying to parents, can you come and pick up your child? And if that's for a short period of time, as I've said, that needs, but there needs to be follow-up to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to parent, there needs to be documentation of when that's happening. There needs to be a plan put in place for that student to get back into that school as quickly as possible, if not ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complicated, difficult situation, and I hate to say it, not trying to avoid the question, but if we actually had, we, being our members and parents actually had the supports that they needed on the ground, I don't think you'd see the kind of restraint that you're seeing. I don't think you'd see students being removed or taken out of classrooms for any period of time, frankly.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think this is sometimes where parents in the autism community feel like their children are pawns because they're asked to come and pick them up. There's no documentation because they're not being suspended. Nothing's happening formally. So as you say, if it's just for a little cooling off or a day for the board to come up with a plan and then meet and do an intake, that's one thing. But I think for some parents, we hear it's being used over and over again. And so to get the supports, then there's no paperwork. But then what do? It's almost to the point where parents are feeling they have to leave their child there and they know their child is going to either have a meltdown, the situation's going to escalate. And it's put back on the parents. It really seems unfair. So they're just told to come, like leave work, come and pick. There's no suspension, there's no paperwork.
Well, this is something, Sam, that we've done a lot of work. Our president, Laura Kirby-McIntosh, has done a lot of work on exclusion, and the reason being is to highlight the fact that there are sufficient supports in schools. And she did some work with David Lepofsky, and I've learned a thing or two about exclusion, right? So there's two kinds. There's soft exclusion and hard exclusion. Soft exclusion is come pick up your child early, having a tough time. Maybe don't come on the class trip. Oh, we don't have a role for him in the school play. Maybe we can't go to gym class. You can't go to assembly, right? And these things happen. That is crushing for parents and children, right? Because the kids are left out in an inclusive system.
Absolutely.
The kids are not part of that. And then there's the hard exclusion, which is, sorry, your child cannot come back to school. And okay, well, when can he come back? We don't know. Is there going to be another placement? We don't know, right? Because there's no data. Because there's no data,
So
we can't change things, can we? Because it didn't happen.
So my heart goes out to parents who are in that situation, honestly. My first recommendation to them is whether it is a soft or a hard exclusion, get documentation for it. If they need to come home for a short period of time, if they can't find a spot for them in a play, etc., get that documented. Get documentation, document it yourself. But
I'm wondering. Because we know that principals will use this to keep peace in the kingdom, right? Like things are not going well. Okay, let's put a pause. We also know that children cannot be expelled or suspended if their behavior is related to their disability. So if we were to change even just that, maybe we could get more supports. But I'm wondering, would ETFO and other unions and teachers be willing to partner with parents and take the data together? Would a union be willing to ask their members, when you've had to exclude a child or when you're aware of that, can you document it? Can you send this into head office?
Is that something doing the exclusion? No, it's the board.
It is the board doing the exclusion. However, because we have this funny black backdoor loophole, we're not acquiring the data in order to make the argument that our children need more help. So I'm wondering, it's just an idea. But is that something?
I wouldn't be comfortable, and also in the sense I would wonder, would it be valid because I'm employed by the school board? They're only the ones with the power to do that, not me. So the data needs to come from.
So how do we compel? It's back to the parents.
It is back to the parents.
Back to the parents. How can we compel school boards to get this data or change?
The school boards not unite with the unions and parents against the Ministry of Education to advocate for funding, because we are the frontline workers and we all really the intent is we want what's best for children. We all got into this field because we love working with children and we want to help them learn. And I really feel against this government, we all need to be banding together.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that. School boards are speaking out and writing letters about cuts to education, the effects that's going to have on students. They have been calling for increased funding for special education for some time. They live the reality. There are school boards in southwestern Ontario, $10 million shortfall in their special education funding, which, by the way, didn't go up really this year in terms of 3.1 billion, 3.1 billion. It's staying the same. So they are doing that. And just if I can, I agree with Lark that it is the job of school boards and their administrators, principals, and vice principals in schools and work sites to make those decisions. I think principals, given what they have to deal with, are doing the best they can under those situations based on everything that they have to take into consideration. And I think principals too are concerned about the cuts and how this what's going to happen in September that we talked about earlier, how that's going to even more negatively affect what's happening. But it is not teachers' responsibility in terms of the actual documentation if that software.
This is tricky. Like, how do we get this data? How do we do this?
Parents need to start asking admins, keeping copies of emails, go up to a superintendent if you need. I sometimes feel admins possibly have their hands tied as well. They do answer to someone above them as well. And unfortunately, I always find this squeaky wheel. It's the squeaky wheel.
It's very easy for me to sit here and pepper you with the questions. I realize that, right? Because I'm free as a bird.
You do such a good job.
I'm free as a bird, right? But we have to make this case. We can't let this go undocumented any longer.
I just wanted to say, I think Maria's on here. Maria, it you who posted with one of the lawyers who talked about the 4 legal ways of exclusion, and that's a good 7-minute video to watch legally. So it had to be suspension, then to expulsion, whether they were transferred out of the school to go into an ISP program, or the board just gave them a new school under the idea of a fresh start for if family was on board with that.
And I'm going to watch the video, Marie, right after.
Maria, can you post that video?
It was a good post.
Yeah, it was a really good. Everything Maria posts is amazing.
Maria.
Faith asks, okay, so we may be getting into some non-union kinds of issues that maybe Lark can help with. Faith asks, after the IPRC meeting and while visiting a placement offer, what should I be asking the new school or teacher?
So after you've had IPRC and she's getting a new placement at a new school and an ISP, what should she be asking?
What should she be asking the new teacher?
Wow, that's a great question, Faith. I mean, this isn't my background, but I think I would want to go and see the site. I would want to see if that teacher is going to be in that program next year. Maybe I might ask some professional questions. Everyone should know too that we all belong to OCT, the Ontario College of Teachers. Anybody can log on and see teachers' credentials and when they got them. What faith? I'm hoping the teacher would ask what faith suggestions are with working with her child. What a daily schedule would look like, how many support staff are in the room, IEP writing. I don't know.
Okay,
Faith can always DM me, but I think there's
you can message Lark, Faith,
lots of people on the site with better experience.
We talk about all these things. So Lee asks, this is a long question, and I'm hoping you can discuss how Laura Kirby McIntosh, our Prez, my fearless leader and teacher, she talks a lot about how the role of teacher gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and this question kind of relates to that, I think. Lee says, If my nonverbal son is entering the school system for the first time, JK, this fall, but due to the OAP cuts, we have 0 assessments aside from diagnosis. How do I ensure he gets the support he needs in a timely manner, i.e., toileting, eloping, pica? Pica is a condition of eating. Do you know what pica is?
Mhm.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, it is putting non-food items and trying to eat them, trying to chew them, or keeping them in your mouth. It's a very serious choking hazard, as well as other, And EpiPen. Oh, baby. Previously, the school has 1 EA that is shared with all classes. One child has this EA one-to-one for 2 hours a day. What is the best way to make his needs known and understood without professional clinical advice, assessments, BCBA, psychologists? So here's a child that's has been left out of the picture, is not going to have the benefit of being a part of the OAP, is going right into school and is a very high needs child with, as far as she knows, only 1 EA available, not specifically for her child. What should this parent do?
So if they're just entering school, and Lark may be able to speak to this better than I, but the first thing I would want, if I was the parent, or I would suggest to the parent, is to set up a meeting with the teachers, with the administration at the school, if there is a spec ed teacher in that school, and set up a time to go in and talk about the challenges that their child is facing, and to be open and honest and specific about it. Step one, so that everyone is aware within that setting of all of the challenges that this student has. What's sad, we talk about inclusive education, and we talk about lack of funding. Even if this student goes through the formal process and there's an individualized education plan set up for them, and everyone's aware of it, and all the pieces are put in place to support that student, what we're finding is that in most cases, the plans are developed really well. If all of those pieces of that education plan and the supports were in place, there'd be no problem. Yeah. But what we're finding is
it's a great plan. It's a fantastic plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
Right. So they write these. They're obligated to write an individual education plan, which they should, with all of these supports, and then on the ground, there's nothing there to fit the pieces of that plan.
So what do teachers do? What when they come to you and they say, I have a child like this, and I also happen to have 35 other kids in this classroom. Yeah. So how do you support the teacher?
How do we support?
Yes. Yeah. What are you guys going to do about this?
We support them on the ground. We support them with professional development. We do everything we can to support them and that student and others in terms of lobbying day in and day out, regardless of the government, to say, you've got a funding formula that's broken, you need to fix it. You need to move from a statistical model to an actual needs-based model so that student has an educational assistant or whatever they need on a daily basis, and not for 2 hours a day. So we advocate and push and do whatever we can politically and in conjunction with school boards to try and meet those needs. But we're hitting a brick wall, the same as parents are, I think, because there's no political will and there's no specific dedicated funding, meaningful specific funding, needs-based funding to deal with it.
How close are teachers to the edge?
Our members across the board in all those bargaining units are overwhelmed. You can talk to one of them right here if you want to. And I say that because I know I don't live it every day. But
this is a nice one.
Well, I have a question. Yeah. Can I bring up something around our benefits live? Is that good, or is that?
It's up to you. You're the one talking here.
And
Sam
can just cut me off with the like. Yeah. But I was gonna say, I think at some point when I was looking at so obviously when teachers pay into benefits and stuff, that there was an increase in what we were paying into one of our benefits, because there was data to show that teachers are taking more mental health leaves.
Andrea said,
Teachers are very stressed out. This
Yeah.
is, you know, careers that we love. And it really is distressing when you see a 6 or 7 year old that you can't feel like you're helping adequately. I think this is, every question we have is going to come down to funding and money.
Yeah.
And we're that, so Lark is talking about our long-term disability plan and our rate.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, based on the question you had about intake of new students and how that happens and the lack of supports, we're seeing, when I say overwhelmed in terms of mental nervous conditions at the lower grade levels, kindergarten through grade 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's where those teachers know all of those supports are lacking.
Yeah.
There's very little that they can do to help
Yeah,
the
yeah.
student. So
That's a very good point, Lark, because if we are dealing, it is well known in our community that our children, many of our children have a very difficult time with anxiety. So if teachers are anxious and the kids are anxious.
Yeah. I think there's a stigma too. I can only share little things, and please, this is just my experience, but I remember just someone I know in my community talking about, they had moved their child to private school for a year and then switched schools, and they said, you know, we're at a meeting and the teacher was telling us how anxious she was, and you know, I just thought, why would you disclose that to a parent? And maybe you should get another job. And you know, that was okay for me to hear. It's just interesting, you know, to hear all sides. I don't think, unless you're really in there, or you're a parent of a child with special needs or a teacher in that, you really wouldn't understand some of these bigger pictures and the politics and what it entails.
What's the best way for a parent to talk to you when they have a concern?
I always like a quick email to say, will you meet? That's something we could talk about. I know it was one of the questions, like how often does a teacher have to meet with a parent? And really they don't have to outside certain things, but I would always love a quick email. I like to chat with people in person. I think things can be lost in email, so I prefer the phone. Maybe if you have a great administrator, we'll find you some release time so that you could come in and meet with EAs and parents. And then you can chat with them face to face, and if they need documentation, you follow up with the email. Like, it was great to chat with you today. Here were the points we discussed. I was gonna just go back with Lee, like with the EpiPen, teachers always do under Sabrina's law. We're trained every year in the EpiPens with allergies. And the meeting too, I would be asking if they have an autism consultant. So often in quadrants, there's someone who is an autism consultant that they would come and provide support. But I think it all comes down to, I'm not just going to say lack of bodies, but, you know, because we hear a lot, we need more EAs, more EAs. I'm not sure I like the idea of bringing in ABA, you know, if the medical field isn't going to cover this. So if you have a child with epilepsy, if you're at Sick Kids, they have an epilepsy classroom. But for autism, if the medical field is not accountable and we're not getting funding from there, then let's go into the schools with the ABAs.
Yeah, when did schools lose nurses? I remember the school nurse.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
During Mike Harris, I think, leading into that.
Again.
Yeah. And I go back when Lark is talking, making some great points. And when Lark is talking about anxiety, whether it's a teacher, a DEC, occasional teacher, going back to Laura's points about what teachers are doing, just think of a classroom, use a kindergarten classroom with 29 students or a grade 2 classroom with 20 students, and 12 of them are on specific individual education plans or more, and there's no supports, and that teacher on a daily basis knows everything that those students need and can't provide to them well, dealing with the whole class as a whole. That causes professionals to be anxious and concerned, and it can get to be overwhelming because of the lack supports. And
Yeah. Somebody posted, Andrea said, why can't we have specialized schools for kids with disabilities for ones who can't cope with the regular school system? My child has not been in school since December. This is very common in our community. There are many parents who have just chosen to homeschool.
Can I ask, Andrea, if you're getting home instruction
yeah.
at least? Someone should be coming from your board. If you're K to 8, I think it's 3 hours. It's 5 if you're in secondary.
Um,
So what happened to spec ed schools? Did we ever have those?
Yes, we did. And I think when we moved to an inclusive education system, which we absolutely support, but not based on what it looks like now, if there was the political will and the funding and the supports that are needed within the system, then we would truly have an inclusive system. But that's not happening now, and we need to start to look at how we can resolve that. But yes, we did at one time.
Yeah,
I think boards might have a token school here and there. The TDSP has the Beverly School.
Yeah, Eastern region has.
Yes,
Yeah.
So there's
And
a couple others.
And there have been some programs that we're hoping to hear about. QP talked about them. There were some ABA, the name is gone. Demonstration, 17, I think there's, anyway, shut up, Karen. But I can't, I've forgotten the word, it's gone. Here's a tough one. I asked this question, it actually was a question for Harvey Bishkoff, but I want to ask you this question too. It's part of our community, it's part of the conversation. This isn't every child or every situation that a child with autism goes under. Anyway, okay. Let me ask the questions. It's from Anonymous. I am a teacher. I am afraid to share my name. I witnessed an incident where a colleague of mine was badly hurt by a student. I feel helpless. I obviously care for my colleague, and we all know that the student was overwhelmed. Our school does not have enough supports to proactively circumvent incidents. I have my hands tied as I fear repercussions from my employer if I speak out. So what I asked Harvey was, why is this teacher afraid to report the incident?
There are so many answers to that. There's so many pieces to that puzzle.
Yeah.
It depends, for example, if it's an occasional teacher who's in for 3 days in a class and not wanting to report that, they may be fearing that, they're trying to get a job. They may be fearing that they're not
called back.
They won't be called back. If it's a teacher, the position that puts them in with their administration, should they be reporting it? Absolutely. Do we encourage them to do everything we can to have them report it?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of concern about repercussions, pushback.
Why would a teacher be afraid of getting in trouble for dealing with something that needs to be addressed? That's what I'm interested in. There is a climate of fear.
Yes.
We have parents afraid of teachers, and teachers afraid of parents, and teachers afraid of principals. Sam is afraid of me. Imagine that, right? Like, why? I find it weird. If something happens during the course of the day for my boy who is unable to tell me about it, I'd like to know.
Yeah.
I might cry. I might get upset, but I need to know so we can.
And I agree.
Yeah. So
agree.
why would a teacher be afraid? Do teachers confide in you? Do they confide in the union?
I think they do. I think, teachers can even call our union reps just to kind of vent, to ask for suggestions. Union reps are doing a lot now outside of the school. Regarding your question, it made me pop into my head. If someone got injured, does that go through a health and safety violation? And do then principals have something on their record if a school is put on hold and secure, or there's health and safety violations?
There should be. There should be, absolutely. In that case, the teacher or the colleague that was injured, there should be a report, a formal reporting of that through the reporting process to the administration. The administration is bound to complete their part of that and send that forward. That should all be recorded and dealt with, and statistics should come out, and pieces of that should be dealt with in terms of that process. But there's a legal binding process that should happen. In some cases, and when we surveyed our members, it's not happening. I think in part, the fear part, but also not all, but there were administrators who weren't reporting that. The teachers knew, or the OTs or our early childhood educators knew that it wasn't, that process wasn't being followed through it. But we've done a lot of work to try and focus in on that, the training of, the reporting of, who's responsible to make sure that that happens for the benefit of both our members and the student.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, sort of hypothetically from a teacher, so, and Sam can jump in, I haven't been in that many hugely different schools, but you know, every year the principal decides what you're teaching. You write a list of what your preferences are. There's a staffing committee, so sometimes repercussions hypothetically might be being put somewhere you haven't been in years that you don't like. Maybe you suddenly have 20 IEPs to write in your classroom. Your timetable is made by an administrator.
Any sense to me. Maybe I'm not.
And I'm saying hypothetical.
No, I know.
I'm not
I
saying
know.
this. I'm just saying there might be some of the reasons why teachers, depending, could be.
I mean, as the mom of the 9-year-old, you know, who's like, I'm just trying to send the boy to school. Right?
Yeah.
It's just, I think naively, maybe that should be an easy thing, right? We have a public school system for the public, and yet
For all children.
And yet for some of our kids, just getting them from the front door to the classroom, you know, just talking to a principal, just talking to a teacher, walls go up, people are afraid. What is this climate and that we're in, and that we're not keeping the data, so we can't make the argument to our politicians. We can't say, look, here's the proof, here's the evidence. Please send in the reinforcements.
Yeah.
Doug, somebody do something.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's outrageous. But we've done a lot of work on tracking violent incidences. For example, in our schools, we've done a lot of work on the funding formula, how they relate. And we had, I think, for example, 79% of our members who have actually seen, witnessed, or reported a violent incident.
Yeah. That's shocking to me, right?
Yeah.
That's shocking to me.
Fred.
Sam.
I was gonna say, who's Fred?
Who are you?
Where's
Fred? Who's Fred? I gave
now?
Fred a hard time too.
Yeah.
I gave him a hard time. Come on, fix this for us.
Yeah, we're trying. But we as a union can't fix it. Teachers and our members can't fix it. Boards can't fix it on our own. And it is primary. There needs to be much more cooperation, much more political will on behalf of the current government to fix these problems. In terms of breaking down those barriers and having those conversations, we all need to be working together to make that happen. Respecting the roles that, you know, for example, our members have, parents and how connected they are to that, and the role of administration. But we need to be working together to solve these problems. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I think that's it right there. I don't know, I'm almost a little afraid to share this, but I think sometimes teachers, or if I look at myself, kids, and as I've gotten older and more experienced, this happens less, but
yeah,
I mean, you have to understand where parents are coming from, and you can get defensive. Maybe if you have a parent upset with you and your administrator, depending, might say, this is for you to deal with, this is your job. And I think with age and experience, and when I work with colleagues, it's like, I hear what you're saying. I'm doing the best I can. What would you suggest for me? And let's get the principal involved. Because I think I need more supports, and I would like my administrator as my employer, and who's running this school, who's just as accountable. We all need to sit and work on a team, and I'm not going to be able to get a child more EA support or more anything. It's going to come from the administration.
Yes. So a teacher has identified needs that a child may have, and I assume makes some recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So how often are those recommendations heard? I'm talking about after the IPRC. So you're like, we have a kid, he's having a lot of trouble holding his pencil. I really need an OT in here, stat, to help this child.
And you go on the list for OT waiting, or for speech language or social work.
Right.
And how long might that be?
Thanks, Sam.
A while? Yeah, no, a while.
A while,
A
right?
while. I find unless there's
A
an
while.
immediate sort of crisis, even waiting for psycho assessments, like it's just,
Again, welcome to our life, Sam.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the answer is
Yeah.
a while.
a while.
Which is a very accurate answer.
While.
A while.
Yeah.
And what we've said to the government numerous times is, at the very beginning of this whole process and this problem, that wait time, that identification period needs to be much shorter, it needs to be immediate, as soon as, as soon after they are, and certainly not the while that parents are waiting now. But that process, that identification process, working in conjunction with parents, should happen as early as possible, and the support should be there once they've gone through that process.
Yeah. Why is it that all of this stuff has to come back down to the parent?
And ultimately the child.
And ultimately the child.
Yeah.
And that we have a reactive system rather than a proactive system.
Money, 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 money.
It's all about money. So Sam, what do your parents do to support teachers so the teachers can do the jobs that they're trained to do?
Yeah, so I would say to parents, and I say to our members, whether they're teachers, our ECEs, ESPs, PSPs, occasional teachers.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Our members.
Yeah.
Yeah, that our members and parents with our members, we need to be having conversation. And I think they need to be having honest, frank conversations about the realities that both our members and those parents are facing on a daily basis, and trying to work together with the number one goal of helping that student through their educational experience.
I've been putting you on
that's difficult.
Exactly.
I understand.
It totally is, and I've been putting you on the spot a lot. Can you think of something on the spot of an example that a parent could do to support a teacher in getting supports that child needs, their child needs? And I say this kind of hesitantly because for me, it's very strange to have my child in a system that I have to, and I'm not talking about me, but that as a mom, I have to negotiate for my child's education. I'm not buying a car. I'm sending my kids to school, right? And if I'm a good negotiator, maybe, just maybe, I might get the right supports if I manage to hit the nail on the head in just the right way, but I've got to be nice. I've got to bring cookies and coffee. I've got to make friends. Come on, I'm trying to send the boy to school. Right? And we all know this is wrong, and yet it's like we've all drunk the Kool-Aid, and that's why I am slightly irreverent with you to just broadcast that I'm not in your system, right? I'm not part of a hierarchy. I'm just a stay-at-home mom from Scarborough going like, guys, come on, everybody, come on. fun, right?
Yeah, so
what can a mom or a dad do to support their teacher?
Talk to that teacher and tell them that you want to support them in whatever they're doing. But we need to be clear, and Lark talked about this.
Yeah.
You can be supportive, you can work with that teacher, or that DEC, ESP, PSP. It's not up to them. They don't have the ability to get the supports that you both need for your child.
So who do we talk to?
So, Lark can speak to this, but I mean, you need to make our members aware of that. You need to talk to the administration. You need to talk to superintendents. You need to talk to trustees and chairs of your school board. And you need to keep doing, and I say this to all of the parents on here, keep doing, in addition to that, keep doing what you're doing and inspiring me and others in terms of not going away and keeping pressure on publicly on this government in terms of what you need, what your children need. But don't stop at, and school boards, trustees, principals might be concerned with what I'm saying, but it's the reality. Don't stop at your administrator because there are levels above them that are tying their hands. So just keep working.
So what are the levels? Teacher?
Administrator.
Administrator being?
Vice principal and principal.
Vice principal and principal.
Area superintendent.
Area superintendent.
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 Perhaps a special education superintendent.
Special education superintendent.
Executive superintendent.
Executive superintendent.
And then your director, I believe. Director.
And then director of education. And then Sam Hammond.
No, well, and there are trustees in there.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, trustees.
I was just saying.
Oh my God.
Get your admin. CC the trustee and the area superintendent.
Yeah.
CC the MPP. Let's get our MPPs.
Well, we know a little bit about talking to
when they're
MPPs.
talking, especially if your MPP is part of the government that's doing this funding, if they're part of the conservative government right now. Let them be aware. Or whomever.
We are happy to work with whoever the government is.
Yes.
We were happy to work with liberals. We are happy to work with NDP. We're happy to work with conservatives. We're just moms and dads in the OAC and Autistic South Africa.
As Sam said, principals, I feel, often too have their hands tied. They answer to someone else.
Is there a principal out there that wants to do a Facebook Live? I haven't found one yet.
No.
I'm working on it. You got a friend?
Well, you could approach the president of the Ontario Principals Council.
Yeah, I should do
Could
that.
ask them.
That's a good
Okay.
idea.
Next on my
I'm
list.
not committing you.
We'll
Here we
say
are.
Sam
Here we
said
are.
we
Sam
could.
said we could.
Yeah, can I just say,
Yeah.
when Lark talked about CCing people, the emails that I get, I shouldn't be telling you this publicly, but the emails that I get that get my attention quicker are the ones where someone has emailed me with a specific concern, but CC'd it to 10 other people in key positions, either within ETFO or in the government, et cetera. Because then I know that you've emailed all those other people, and it's a serious concern. They're all aware of it, and we better be working on it together.
Okay.
Or I better be responding to. I respond to all my emails, but specifically, it takes it up a level when I know it's not just you and I having a conversation.
Lovely.
If that makes sense.
Can I ask a question about funding? I think Maria and I had this.
Yeah, and then we should wrap it up. We've
Yeah.
been going for 1 hour and 13 minutes,
My gosh.
and we don't want to keep Sam.
No,
We don't want to
I
keep
can
him.
still do another hour here.
Well, yeah.
I mean, this could be researched, but when a school board has children that are identified as exceptional pupils through the IPRC committee, is the board receiving extra funds for those students?
No,
No, okay.
no.
Yeah. They told us they were, that the kids were. That's what we were told.
When they go through an IPRC process,
So if they go through the IPRC and it's like, okay, you have an exceptionality, LD, autism, gifted, whatever, you've been identified with this exceptionality now, will the school board receive more money? for those students?
My understanding is, now you're challenging me, I'm an expert on budgeting, but my understanding is no, that there may be small envelopes of funding, but the overall funding is specific to special education needs. If that were the case,
Right.
if that were the case, we wouldn't be talking about the overall lack of support, because they've gone through an IPRC and there are 3 things that have been identified, and those 3 things cost additional money. They'd be funded, they would be on the ground. If it was an EA for a half of the day, that would be funded as opposed to, and it's not, opposed to 2 hours a day.
Yeah, so maybe that's
Interesting.
something that we can work on.
There may be other provinces that do have slightly
Yeah.
different funding models where those students the boards do receive.
Let's get our education committee on that. Laura, you get on that. All right, so Sam, thanks.
Pleasure,
Thanks.
absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
you to you.
No,
Thank
You know,
you.
Yeah.
More soon. Thank you so much, everyone. We know that people generally watch these Facebook Lives later. Please feel free to post any other comments, and Lark will respond to them.
I thought it was Karen today.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, Lark will respond.
And
So, yes, please.
can I just say,
Please do.
sincerely, I'm just absolutely amazed and inspired by what the Ontario Autism Coalition is doing, and you as parents of children with autism who are fighting back and not going away. And it's a difficult process and it's a long process, but kudos to you, frankly, for taking the stand you have, doing what you're doing across the province without union bosses telling you what to do, because you know the realities on the ground. So thanks to you for doing that. And all of this other stuff, we need to work together to come up with solutions.
Thanks again.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. This hour went quick.
Yeah, that's good.
Not bad. Stay in the
Good
fight.
job.
Goodbye, everybody. End.